What's up guys, Owen from Owen Thomas Woodcraft here again. Welcome back to day 3, part 3 of the pole lathe build. So in the last part I put most of the basic parts of the lathe together. So we've got our bed, the poppets, the legs and the uprights. So today we're going to start doing all the smaller detail bits. So we're going to start with the wedges, then we'll assemble the tool rest, and then we'll assemble the bungee. Oh, and also make the treadle. So what we're going to use for those, most of it's going to come out of the offcuts from when we were making the bed and the poppets. So hopefully you remember we cut about 4 inches off of the edge of the board for the poppets. We're going to make the wedges and the treadle out of that part, and the piece that we took out for the slot on the bed we're going to use to make the tool rest. Let's get to it. So we're going to start off by ripping down the 4-inch part that we saw. So we're going to start by ripping down this part that we cut from the board that we made the poppets out of. We should be able to get 2-inch so we're going to start by ripping down this piece that we cut from the side of the board that we made the poppets out of. We should be able to get 2-inch boards out of this. So one part's going to be used for making the treadle, and the other bit is going to be used for making the wedges, which is what we're going to do first. So I'm going to fire the saw up, rip this down. Okay, so now we've ripped our bit of timber, we should have a 3.5 inch-ish, 4 inch by 1 inch plank. So we're going to start making the wedges. So assuming that your bed is 12 inches, we need to make sure that the wedge projects a little bit either side so we can knock it in and out easy. So I'm going to mark up 14 inches, about 35 centimetres, just over 35.5 centimetres. We don't want too steep of an angle on the wedge, you want a nice gentle taper on it. So what I normally do is just mark one end at 2 inches and then leave the other end full. What I find is if you have too steep of a wedge, it can work itself loose quite easily, and it just comes loose and then all of a sudden your poppet's loose. With a shallower taper like this, there's less chance of that happening, there's more surface area grabbing. Okay, so we've got that one, and then we want to do exactly the same. So we've got 2 matching wedges. Then we'll saw these out and start marking up the mortises on the poppets. Okay, so now we've got our wedges cut, we can start looking at cutting the mortises in the poppets, so that when we bang these in, these are going to be nice and held nice and tight. I like to put these in so that the wide side is at the back. I don't know if it really matters, but this is just it's just how I do it. So they're going to fit in this way. So what we need to do is mark which side of the poppets is going to be your front, so the side that you're going to work from, and then just bear that in mind when we mark these out. So the poppets need to be in the bed, and we're just going to mark a little line on here on each of them, so that we know where the actual base of the bed's going to be, because we need to make the mortise a little bit higher up than this, so that we make sure that the wedge is going to grip on the base of the bed and not the top of the mortise we're going to cut through here. Okay, so we've got these. Now we can take them off, put them onto the bench, and we'll do the actual full marking out. Okay, so we've got our front mark here. This is the line that I marked off of the base of the bed. So we want, as I said, we want to allow a little bit of room at the top there. So I'm going to mark half an inch, about a centimetre up from that line. Strike it across, and then follow that line all the way around to the back, like so. Then what I need to do is mark the centre point on the wedge. This one's 14 inches, so this is 7 inch in the middle. And get myself a centre line here as well. So what we don't want to be doing is cutting this mortise so that the wedge comes too far through, or not very far through. We want to try and get it so when it's knocked all the way in, it's going to be about even both sides. So making sure that the wedges straight along this line. I'll just mark that angle there off of the bottom of the wedge. You can do it with a bevel if you want to, but since we've got the wedges, it's just as simple to do that. Then we're going to mark a square line here, square line here, so we know where the top and the bottom of our mortise is going to be. Now because we want to make our mortise in the centre, we mark a centre line here. So that's what we're going to line up our drill to. So that one's done. I'm just going to repeat the process for this. There we go. So now we're ready to drill. Okay, now these are all marked out, I am going to drill some holes through to start off the mortise. I'm going to be using a 1-inch spade bit, flat bit, because we've got inch wide wedges. I'm going to use an inch bit so I don't have to muck around trying to take loads out of the width of the mortise. So I'm going to use these lines that we marked on the side as a guide as to the angle of where I need to drill. So I've drilled about halfway through. I'm going to try and meet it from the other side so we get the edges fairly accurate, and then we can always clean out the middle with a chisel. So I'll just get this angled one going. And I'll swap round to the other side. This is why I followed the marks round. There we go, that's it met in the middle. So we've roughed out the mortise with the drill there. Now we just need to tidy it up a bit. And we're going to be using an inch wide chisel just to pare down these sides and make sure that they are all smooth, so we don't get the wedge jamming in sooner than we want it to. So for this I'm just lining up the chisel with the edges of the holes that we've drilled. That should hopefully maintain the width that we want. If you're finding that the holes you've drilled are quite rough, then you could of course use a mallet with the chisel. These seem fairly smooth at the moment, so I should be able to get away with just pushing it. check the width. That's pretty good, a little bit tight. Yep, that should be good. So what we don't want is for the mortise to be so tight that it binds on the wedge. What we want it to be able to to go fairly easily in and out of this hole, but we want it to bind to grab onto the between the bottom of the bed and the bottom of the mortise here. So once we've got the sides pared down, we want to start having a look at the ends. You can just round this off to fit in, but I've got a little lump in the bottom here, so I need to be chiseling out some of this end grain here. So I'm just going to work this along. I'm going to try and keep it in line with what I've marked earlier. The nice thing about using Douglas fir or softwood is that it's really easy to chisel. I don't really use softwood very much, and I miss it. It's so much easier. It cuts like butter as long as your chisels are nice and sharp. So you see I'm always working from both sides, so that I can try and get it nice and accurate to the lines that I've drawn. there we go. So that, I'm happy with that. Before we put the wedge fully in, we'll try it fully in with the poppet. I'm just going to tidy up the corners of this because they're a little bit rough. We don't want any splinters or anything, and it should make it slide into the mortise a little bit better. It'll also protect the edges, so an edge with a chamfer or an edge that's rounded will be a lot stronger. Won't split out so much if you're hitting it with a hammer. Okay, so that should be pretty much done. I'm going to try it in the lathe now. Right, so I'm just going to get the poppet in there and we'll make sure that this fits nicely. Well, that holds pretty well. It's not come quite as far through as I'd like. So I might just trim a little bit off of the bottom of this wedge so it projects a bit further forward, because during when it's in use, it's going to be a bit tricky to try and knock that out in a nice efficient manner when we've got plenty sticking out the back side here. So I'm just going to trim a little bit off the bottom, and I'll get the other one sorted out as well, so we're all at this stage. So now we've got both our poppets fitted and the wedges nice and tight in, we can start working out the height to cut the poppets. So the first thing we're going to do is get the shorter of the two to the right height. Now this is going to be different for everyone because everybody's a different height, but if you use the same guidelines that I do, it should work out pretty well for you. So I like to have the top of the shortest poppet, which is the one that's going to hold the right angled lathe centre, to be about in line with my sternum, so it's about here, so I don't have very much to take off of this one. So just put a little mark on there. I'm going to trim the top off of this, and that's going to set our heights for the tool rest. trimmed the shorter of the poppets to length, we're going to push it right up against the tall one and get the wedge back in. And we're going to transfer the height of this onto this one, because that is going to dictate the height of our tool rest, which is going to be coming out from here. Now, there's a few different ways of thinking about a tool rest. Some people like to have their tool rest at an angle, because they feel that when they're working closer to a bowl, it should be lower, but when it's further away, it should be higher up. I've tried it, and personally I don't really feel like there's that much difference. I just use a flat one on my personal lathe, and I can turn pretty much anything without any problem. But I guess that's something, if you want to look into it, go for it. What we're going to do is cut a little housing joint into the outside here, and then have the tool rest coming out here. The other thing you can choose to do, if you want to, rather than cut a housing into here, is to use the large drill bit, the 1.5" drill bit that I used for making the legs, and drill yourself a tenon in here, and then just have a round tenon on the end of the tool rest, and put it into the front here so it's sticking out. I'm going to do it with a housing because I think it's a little bit stronger and a bit more stable, but the option is yours. So I'm going to grab my one of the leftover pieces from cutting the slot out. I'm going to trim it down to about 2 inches wide, and then I'm going to use it to make the tool rest. Okay, so after that bit of sawing, you should have something that's about 2 inches by 3 inches, and it should be around 95 centimeters, 37 inches. This is assuming you're doing it all the same size that I am. It doesn't really matter too much about how long this is. I mean, I probably wouldn't make a tool rest less than 90 centimeters, 36 inch. Just because the shorter it is, the more you limit the diameter of bowl that you're going to make, and especially if you're going to be looking at doing maybe plate turning or something like that. You need a good bit of length because you have to set the tool rest quite far back to get that diameter of timber in. So you've probably got some messy ends, just like I have if you cut the ends out how I did. So just for neatness, it's worth trimming a tiny bit off of the ends. You don't want any rough bits, and if you're going to all this effort of building a lathe, you probably want to have one that's looking pretty tidy. So we'll trim those off, and then we'll start looking at how to mark out how to fit this onto the poppets. Okay, so you should have your mark that you transferred on earlier from the shorter poppet, and what we want to do is square that off along the outside face of the longer of the poppets. So we mark that there, then we're going to introduce these two. So I'm just going to set this nice and straight along the mark that I've just got, and mark the edge there. So that's going to give us the dead width of the bit that's going to be for our tool rest. Obviously you could do this by measuring it. I prefer to just offer the bit of wood up. So we can follow that line. So hopefully that's now going to be square to that. I don't want to be cutting the full depth of this into here, because that would quite drastically weaken your poppet. So what I'm going to do is mark a line 20 centimeters in, and then follow these two marks, these two lines, sorry, down there. So this area is what we're going to cut out, and then this is going to sit nice and snug into those. So it's going to be supported on both sides, so it will be nice and stable, shouldn't move around too much. So it should be better for when you're turning. So with this all marked up now, what we can look at is cutting it out. Now obviously you can do that with a handsaw. I'm going to do it with the circular saw because of time constraints. So what I'm going to do is cut very, very neatly to these two outside lines first. Then I'm going to run the saw across a bunch more times so that it's easier to chisel out all this material in here. Okay, so we should have all of this. What the fuck are you talking about? Cool, so now you've got your saw cuts in here. This section of timber should be a lot easier to carve out than if you were just trying to do it all in one go. So grab yourself a chisel. At this stage I like to use bevel downwards and start chipping the top layer off. And what you want to be doing is trying to work your way all the way down to the lines you've marked and trying to get a nice flat bottom to this little section. Right, now we've got the tool rest fitting in snugly. I am going to put a bolt through this and through the poppet just to hold it in place. Now obviously you can use a more rustic, traditional method if you want, like putting a wooden peg through. I'm going to use a bolt because these are going to be for my teaching work. So it means they're going to have to be put up and put down quite a lot. To my mind, a bolt for that is going to be a lot longer lasting than a wooden peg. Plus, because I am very forgetful and slightly clumsy sometimes, I stand less chance of losing one of these than I do losing a peg. So I'm just going to pop a hole into this about halfway. About halfway along, right in the middle. Right, so now we've bolted this part on, we can look at making the actual tool rest, which is the bit that the movable bit that the hook tool is going to sit on. For that, we're going to use the offcut from this part, which was, as hopefully you remember, the piece from the slot that we cut into the bed. So it's going to sit on here. It's a little bit wide at the moment, so we're going to cut it down to just over 2 inches. Pop a hole in the end so we can put a fixing in here. So we've got a nice amount of adjustment here. So we can fit different sized bowls onto the lathe. So I'm going to get cutting this, and then we'll look at how I shape the top of it. Okay, so now we've got this bit to the right width. We're going to shape the top so that it's got a slight peak in the middle. That will just make it easier for you to position your hook tool as you're turning. So hopefully you can see on the end here, we're just going to take these top 2 corners off. And you can do that either using a draw knife, or if you have one, you could do it with a plane. I'll show you doing it with a draw knife, but however you want to achieve that, it's the same thing. This is about 1 inch thick. I wouldn't go much thinner than that because you start getting a bit of flex if you go much thinner than that. And when you're turning, it's good to have everything as solid and stable as you can get it, because any movement in the tool rest will transfer onto the bowl surface as maybe like a ripple or something like that. So you need to make sure this is a decent size. If as you've been working through using all the offcuts from the lathe bed and the poppets, and you don't have a piece of wood that's thick enough left over, just go out and grab another piece from your merchants or something like that. Inch by 2 inch or inch by 3 inch timber is a pretty standard size, so it's not difficult to pick up. I'm just trying to run through this using the minimum amount of timber to try and keep it cheaper for you guys. So I'm going to jump on the shave horse now and shape the ends of this down. Right, so now we've got the top of that shaped in. The next step with this is going to be to drill a hole through this and into the top of the poppet, so that we get a nice pivot point, so so this doesn't wobble around too much. But we can't get the right position for this until we've made the hole for where the centre is going to go. So we're going to pop this to one side for now, and the next thing is to mark out for where we're going to put our lathe centres. Right guys, I hope you found that helpful. This is going to be the end of part number 3. Next one is part number 4. And we are going to be finishing the lathe off, so we're going to be sorting out the metalwork, the bungee, and we are going to be sorting out the treadle. So I'll catch you guys soon. Stay sharp and stay positive.